Last winter, I worked at a manufacturing company as a die-cast operator. My duties were to calibrate, operate, and maintain the die-casting equipment. It pays well and I enjoy the work. The downside was the night shift, which was only some of the time, but enough to mess with your mind. Getting off work in the middle of the night does something to your mind. It makes you a bit edgy and even paranoid. Maybe it's just the darkness and nobody around. So, when I came home one night at about 3 a.m., I was really freaked out to find the front window of my house was shattered. When I opened the door and turned on the light, I saw glass everywhere, and the winter wind was whipping the curtains. I first thought someone had broken into my house and ransacked it. But as I looked around, nothing else was out of place. I checked the other rooms and all was fine. Nothing appeared to be stolen, and no one was in the house but me. As I started to put the glass shards into a large garbage can, I found a baseball-sized rock under the couch and knew the cause of the breakage. But who would have done that was a mystery. I took a sheet of plastic that covered the firewood outside and taped it over the window for the night. In the morning, I called a window repair company to come and replace the glass. Large front window glass isn't cheap, and it was even more expensive on an emergency repair order. Then a few days later, I was leaving the house one morning on my way to work, and my car was sitting on 4 flat tires. Well, this couldn't be a coincidence. The window and the tires had to be connected in some way. I suspected an ex-girlfriend that I had broken up with 6 months earlier. We hadn't dated that long, maybe 2 or 3 months. After we broke up, she continued to call me every night. She kept making promises and saying she wouldn't be high maintenance or anything. I just said we weren't a match, and I wanted to date other girls. But this girl wouldn't leave me alone. She calls at every hour of the day. I finally had to tell her if she kept calling, I would block her. Well, she kept calling, and so I did. Now, looking at my car with the tires slashed, I was sure it was her. I called her number to tell her she would pay for all the damage, or I would call the police. The number just rang and she never picked up. I called another co-worker and asked if he would pick me up and take me to work with him, and he did. When I got to work, I called the police and reported the 2 incidents without disclosing who I suspected. I just asked if they could keep an eye on my house as I felt I must be a target of somebody out to get me. 2 nights later, I was on the night shift and got home again around 3 in the morning. This time the front door looked like it had been hit with an axe. The door frame was completely busted, and the front door hung from the top hinge, dangling more open than closed. I sat in my car, freaked out, too afraid to enter my home alone at this time of night or morning before daylight. I called the police to come to report the vandalism. An officer showed up quickly, looked at the door, and asked me many questions. He suggested I wait in my car until he gave me the all clear to enter. He was inside for about 10 minutes before he returned with my ex-girlfriend in handcuffs. He said he found her hiding in my bedroom closet with a knife in her hand. What sent her over the edge, I don't know. I think she would have killed me if I had gone into the house alone. My first relationship was a chilling nightmare. I was a junior in high school who had transferred from another city mid-year. My dad was military and was stationed at different bases throughout my school years. Maybe that is why I didn't have a boyfriend. Just as I would start to meet a boy, we were moved. I know it was his job, so I never complained. I'm also a bit shy around boys, so it takes me a lot of time to warm up or chat between classes. I usually hang with the girls who like to study together, and they aren't very social with the boys either, so it's not like there is a network for a boyfriend. So let me tell you how I met Frank. He was working at the burger joint that all of us kids went to on Friday and Saturday nights to hang out eating Big Bob's Bodacious Burger and Swamp Runner Muddy Cheese Fries. They taste better than they sound. They also have fabulous shakes and ice cream floats. You don't want to know what they call them. Frank worked both on the grill and as a server some nights. That is how I met him. We started talking when he came to the table to serve. Then he began to sit with us after his shift. He came off as a nice guy. He's not super handsome or athletic, but I'm not cheerleader material. I'm pretty, and he is rebellious good looking. He said he had graduated 2 years before but couldn't afford college, so he started flipping burgers. However, he was ambitious to open his own burger grill in a couple of years. After a few weekends socializing at the burger grill, I started to go watch him play baseball with the local league, and he would come to my softball games. We sort of officially became boyfriend and girlfriend after just a few weeks. We didn't go on many traditional dates like dinner and a movie. Our dates consisted mainly of sports events, Mexican food at a food truck, and just driving around in his car and hanging out watching TV at his place. He still lived with his mother, who worked crazy hours and was never home. His father didn't exist, so we mostly had the house to ourselves. If I were to describe Frank, he was a hothead. Anger swelled up in him quickly if you didn't go along with his ideas. Heaven forbid his team lost a game, he would blow a head gasket. Even though he played baseball with the league guys, he wasn't an athlete and didn't hang out with them after the games. He was mostly in what I'd describe as the stoner. He hung with the gang that fashioned themselves as the tough guys. I didn't meet many of his friends. In fact, I never met any of them. And well, that was fine by me. I didn't like that group. Frank and me mostly just hung out together, just the two of us. After a few months, I started talking with a boy in my chemistry class who helped me prepare for each daily assignment. I had difficulty with chemistry, and he was kind and helpful. His name was Tim. He was the smartest in the class. Well, I started to develop feelings for Tim. He was my own age, whereas Frank was 4 years older. Tim and I were simultaneously going through the same high school experiences, so it was a lot of fun. I quickly lost interest in Frank. I've never broken up with anyone before, but I wanted to be kind and thought it best to meet him in person and explain I'd like to date another boy in my class. So Frank called and asked if he could pick me up on Friday after school, and I said yes, that would be great, as I had some stuff I wanted to talk to him about. He knew instantly what I intended to say. He picked me up and said, "So, what's on your mind?" We should take a break from dating for a little while, and I would like to do some high school stuff. He refused to accept that I was serious, and as I told you, he is a bit of a hothead when things don't go his way, and he blew into his rage and demanded what he had done. When I told him the spark I felt on the first meetings at the Burger Grill just wasn't there for me anymore, and I'd like to have more high school experiences, he got so mad I thought he was going to crash the car. He slams his fist into the windshield so hard that a crack shoots across. He was yelling and frightening me with his erratic driving. I wish I had told him in the park, not while driving. I asked him to pull over. I wanted to get out. He calmed briefly and said, "No, I'll take you home," and begged me not to leave him. He said he was just angry because he loved me, but as he drove, he continued to get angrier and angrier. He wanted more details as to how this decision of mine was made. He wanted to know what it was that he did wrong, and as he spoke, and the anger welled up again, he started to disregard red lights and stop signs, and we were defiantly not going toward my home. I again shouted at him, "Pull over! I want out!" He shouted back, "No!" I knew his temper, but I had never seen him like this with me before. I was panicking with fear for my life. He was showing menacing and deliberate disrespect for me. He finally pulled over in the middle of nowhere, let me out, and sped off. I called my mom on my cell phone. She picked me up, and I told her how much Frank had scared me. I felt lucky to be alive. I wished this story ended here, but it didn't. That night, Frank sent me a text message full of apologies and asking for forgiveness. I responded, "We are finished, Frank." Saturday night, I left my house to walk to Tim's house. He lives in the same neighborhood as me. We had plans to work on our science project together. It was after dark, and my street only had a few streetlights, so mostly I was walking in the dark. At one point, I was between the streetlights in a dark spot, and I looked back and saw a man pass under the streetlight behind me, which wasn't too far behind me. The guy was walking about the same pace as me, keeping the distance. He was wearing a dark jacket and had a hat on. It was too dark and too much shadow to see his face. It wasn't uncommon to have foot traffic on our street, but this guy gave me the creeps. As I turned onto Tim's street, I felt the man's presence getting closer. His pace had picked up, my heart rate was racing, and I started to walk faster. On my phone, I punched Tim's speed dial. He picked up on the first ring. I said, "Tim, please come outside. I'm just up the street and someone is following me." Tim said okay, he was coming. I looked over my shoulder and heard footsteps coming quickly behind me. I screamed and started to run. The man in the black jacket was right behind me. At that moment, Tim appeared under the streetlight at the bottom of his driveway and started to run in my direction. He had me in his arms in seconds, saying he was running in the other direction. "You're safe." I looked back and saw the man in black turning the corner at the top of the street and disappearing out of sight. I never got a good look at him, but I was sure it was Frank by his height and build. Over the next week, I got calls from unknown numbers, and I would see Frank's car parked at different ends of my street. I could look out my upstairs bedroom window in the middle of the night and see his car drive past my house. One night after he had driven by, my father said, "Let's go see this guy." Remember, my father is military and he works out regularly. He isn't someone you want to cross. Dad and I drove over to Frank's house. I waited in the car as Dad went and knocked on the door. He spoke with Frank's mother. He was speaking loudly so that Frank could hear on the inside since we were sure he was home. I had the passenger window down and was listening from the car. Dad said clearly and without equivocation that if Frank continued his harassment, he would take it to the police. Frank was not to contact his daughter in any way. Did he make himself clear? I continued to date Tim through my senior year. We both went to different colleges but stayed in touch. Frank was my first life lesson in dating. When you see the warning lights popping off in your head, listen to your gut and run. In my mid-20s, I dated a pretty great girl named Cassandra. She was friendly and very attractive. We had a lot in common and enjoyed active outdoor sports together. We would go to different parks, run the trails, head to the beach, and body surf the waves. We really had a great time together. After about a half year, she landed a great new job in Seattle, meaning she would be leaving San Diego. We really liked each other, but knew we wouldn't be a permanent couple. So we mutually agreed to go our separate ways and hopefully stay in contact as friends. Our separation was on excellent terms. We were staying friends but no longer doing things together. I miraculously found a new girlfriend within a few days. She was a girl I met running one afternoon. We were taking the same path and discovered we were both single. Well, I digress. About 2 weeks later, Cassandra messaged that she was packed and ready to move to Seattle. Still, there was some confusion, and a mix-up occurred between apartment rentals. She was out of her place in San Diego, and the apartment in Seattle was still occupied by the vacating tenant. She seemed she had a week of nowhere to stay, and she asked if I could put her up at my place. She said it would be greatly appreciated, and she would make it up to me sometime in the future. I wasn't very comfortable with this, mainly because I had a new girlfriend, and I wasn't sure how well she would take me hosting my ex for a week. I told her we were just friends and she was desperate for a place to stay between apartments in her move. She agreed and seemed okay with the situation but said, "Just remember, all ex-girlfriends become weird. That is just how it is, so be careful." I told Cassandra, "Yes, come and stay the week, no problem." She could couch surf and I'd stay in my bedroom. When she arrived, we had the basic small talk about how you have been in the last couple of weeks updates. I mentioned I had luckily found a new girlfriend and was very happy. I decided to get that out front since it was more than possible the two would meet in the week. She was my guest. I hoped it wouldn't be awkward for her, my new girl, or myself. I reasoned that I would be working most of the time, so there would be little interaction between all of us. The first part of the week went without any hitches. I was up and gone before she awoke in the morning and was back late enough that we just shared tea before each went to bed or couched to sleep. But then, towards the end of the stay, I got home very late, and Cassandra was already asleep on the couch. And I didn't wake her, just went to my bedroom and went to bed. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke with a very weird feeling that someone was in the room beside me. I lay quietly in bed with my eyes open but couldn't see anything in the darkness and listened. And then I knew I wasn't alone. I sat up and said, "Cassandra, is that you?" And she stepped into the moonlight cast through the window. She was standing at the side of my bed, staring at me with a face filled with venom. I said, "Cassandra, are you okay?" She said nothing, turned and walked out of the room, closing the door behind her. I was baffled at the strange behavior and lay awake in bed until morning. The only thing I could determine was that she had sleepwalked. She had never spoken of sleepwalking ever in our months together. Before I left for work, I had a cup of coffee with her and told her of the nocturnal visitation. She genuinely seemed surprised and thought I was joking. She had no recollection of the event and said she had never sleepwalked in her life. I wondered if I had dreamed of the occurrence in my sleep, but it felt so real, and I have never had dreams like that. She jokingly said, "Don't worry, I won't kill you in your sleep. It won't happen again." However, the next night, I was again awakened in the middle of the night by a presence in my room. Cassandra's features were clearly visible in the moonlight from the window. She was bending over me with her face just a foot above mine. I could see her snarled lips and every line on her angry face. Our eyes met hardly inches apart. I said, "Cassandra, what are you doing?" She stood up, turned around, and walked out of the room. I got up, locked the door, and sat in bed for the rest of the night, too afraid to go into the living room. I heard Cassandra preparing to leave at dawn, and I got up. She said she didn't want to wake me. She was on her way to Seattle. How did I sleep? I told her she again visited me in my bed in the middle of the night and she only said, "You wish," and laughed. She had no recollection of the nightly visits, but for me, a chilling nightmare I will never forget.